really important even being addressed? Are Americans being led down a path that will ultimately suspend their civil liberties, not just again, but for good this time? All their major players that are being used that are just part of an implementation process of a greater agenda, one that will destroy America as we've known it. And is Facebook really a social media platform, or is it a covert propaganda arm of the government? As Mark Zuckerberg admits, the Biden-Harris administration repeatedly pressured and coerced Facebook to censor, block, or alter what Americans were permitted to see and read on it. These questions and more are answered as Dr. David Martin exposes these crimes and their criminals in his truth-bomb report you're about to hear.
But I want to get into the latest numbers, the facts, the death numbers, all the key intel you've got. But in general, how has their attack gone? Because it has created a great awakening. They kind of want us to forget about that and move on to the next hysteria, the next fear. But I don't think this has gone too well. And when they are at the Clinton Global Foundation or UN events, and they openly, when they're not trying to put us in the general public, they say people hate us, they don't trust us. That was the main name of this year's Davos event. They've taken Schwab off the front billing. He's still the head of it, but he's so hated. So if you see Bill Gates clips, now his wife left him. Warren Buffett's pulled out of the foundation. All these other big groups are doing it. It looks to me like things didn't go the way they wanted, but they never give up. They're just steamrolling ahead with the plan.
Well, you know, I've encouraged people to go back and look at the Gates Foundation in its formation, because Janet Reno never disclosed what the actual, not surprisingly, undisclosed antitrust settlement was when Bill Gates was found to be a criminal racketeer and monopolist. You know, it's not by any surprise that his reputation laundering exercise was to create this kind of evergreen pool of capital, which was not a fine in any way, shape, or form. Remember, the Gates Foundation became way more popular in terms of global consequence than Microsoft could have ever been. A technology company could never have had the influence the Gates Foundation had. And by the way, everybody in the Clinton camp knows this. Everybody, you know, around Janet Reno knows this. They know what they did. And to your point, Alex, it's actually somewhat amusing that individuals, patriots like you and me, actually with precious little resources, with very, very little moral support or otherwise, we did actually have some amazing people who actually stood with us. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, the little guy actually came out with the David and Goliath story, and it looks like David actually won, because remember that during COVID, and if you go back to 2011, to the decade of the vaccine, the publication by the World Health Organization's Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, we were supposed to have a universal acceptance of this kind of pan-influenza vaccine that was supposed to be a childhood mandatory vaccine for every infant at birth. Well, that didn't work out so well. And obviously, as you know, in 2018, Anthony Fauci lamented that nobody was actually taking his boy crying wolf seriously. So he needed to come up with a mythical wolf. And lo and behold, he had something in store. He actually had in 2016, the Wuhan Institute of Virology Virus 1 poised for human emergence, according to Ralph Barrett. He had the weapon already in the arsenal. And what he decided to do is deploy it, create what became the coup d'etat of 2020, which is Alex Azar taking over and Anthony Fauci taking over and Deborah Birx taking over the United States government, while President Trump stood by and did not know at the time, nor does he still know, that he was actually a victim of a coup in his own administration. But here's the facts. The facts are that they wanted everybody to fall for the terrorist coercion, and it didn't work. A third of people, remember, a third of people lined up for the shot. A third of people only took it because they were coerced. They had to do it for their job. They had to do it to travel. They had to do it to visit family and loved ones. They had to do it to get into hospitals and clinics, nursing homes, etc. But that third that actually did it in coercion was also a third that knows that they were lied to. They know that it was a lie. They know that even under the declaration in the CARES Act in 2020, and once again, I go back to these are facts, you can go look at them. In the CARES Act, the reason why Alex Azar was able to actually say that this particular injection family, the mRNA injection family, was supposedly going to be something that public health would benefit from, was because he said it would mitigate the spread of COVID-19. Alex, look how many times Anthony Fauci has not only gotten COVID-19, but look how many times he's allegedly also now gotten all kinds of other his own pathogens. The fact of the matter is, Alex Azar lied to the president, had Donald Trump sign documents based on lies. He actually defrauded the United States, and he did it at the behest of individuals who actually had economic gain. And here's the tragedy. The tragedy is some of those individuals are, in fact, the large donors to both political parties. I would love to sit here today and tell you that with all of the developments with Trump and RFK and all of the things that have been happening in the last couple of weeks, that somehow or another David Martin has finally broken down and been enthusiastic about this. But here's the problem. I will not violate the integrity of the facts that Donald Trump had a traitor in his office, Alex Azar. And Alex Azar and Anthony Fauci conspired to overthrow the government and did it. And they did it right under his nose. And at no point has the president been informed of this, because individuals who had an economic gain from the very coup that happened are the ones writing checks to his campaign and to the campaigns of the Democrats. So the fact of the matter is, and this goes to your earlier observation, we have an economic interest that is actually not interested in who wins the White House, because winning the White House is merely the theater that continues the distraction that keeps the public from actually ever addressing the real issues. We have to have immediately a constitutional passage of laws that outlaw gain-of-function research, that outlaw the suspension of civil liberties and our basic rights under our protected amendments. We have to have a law that says that no public media institution, whether it's telecommunications, whether it's social media, whether it's the distribution of media, no media can be censored for any reason, because it is, in fact, this public health exemption. And I'm going to be giving a lecture next week in Washington, D.C. The public health exemption has been put in place since the early 1900s. And by the way, it actually goes back to some of the shipping and quarantine acts in the 1800s, but it has been put in place specifically so that there is always one pathway to make sure that Americans don't have their rights. Public health, since the 1800 Quarantine Act, has been the pathway to suspend civil liberties. And I want to be really clear on something. Everybody talks about the 1905 Jacobson case as though it justified this idea that we all had to be injected, which, by the way, never did. Read the case. What it said was, if you don't get injected, you can be fined. And that's what the case actually said. It never said anybody had to be injected at all.
Yeah, but we also have federal court cases. We also have federal court cases saying black people aren't human. So all court cases we can.
But if you go back, there's an interesting other case, which is Juho v. Williamson. It's a California Supreme Court case out of what was allegedly the influenza pandemic in 1900. And this is a really important one. It was so important, Alex, that the FDA, prior to the release of COVID, actually had an internal document where they were teaching people how to avoid violating the California Supreme Court ruling in Juho v. Williamson, which said you cannot make a capricious determination of one population to quarantine and another population that's free to move about. Well, guess what we did in COVID? We let bars open, we let certain things open, but we actually closed down churches, we closed down gyms, we closed down places where people freely meet and assemble, and we did it in violation of Juho v. Williamson, but that was not an afterthought. That was something that the CDC had in a training document to premeditate the suspension of civil liberties. The CDC itself knew, as a government agency, it was violating the law, and it taught their agents how to violate the law. This is how bad it gets. And that's why I keep going back to encouraging people to go to the first year and a half of Kim and my shows on the Butterfly of the Week on David Martin World on YouTube. If you go back and look at those videos, we lay out all of these facts long before COVID became a popular topic. We talk about the CDC's corruption of the law. We talk about the data collection processes that were done. We talk about Palantir and Peter Thiel and how much Peter Thiel is influencing, obviously, the Trump campaign, J.D. Vance, etc. But we talk about Palantir and how instrumental Palantir was in the promulgation of the data collection and surveillance state that we currently live in. We're trying so hard to pretend like there are good guys and bad guys. And let's be really clear. There are only bad guys if their intent is to deprive humanity of liberty.
Now, I've got a few questions here. Great points. Since you mentioned it, I'm going to clip of Bill Gates about 5 years ago, and he's saying, yeah, we just take these genetically modified organisms and shoot them right in the veins of children to see what they do. We have the FDA third or fourth board they got while they're voting from a few years ago. I played it on Monday, saying, we don't know what it's going to do in children, so we're just going to shoot it at them and see what happens. We have Netanyahu on with a big podcaster, Jordan Peterson, a year and a half ago, saying Israel will be the headquarters of this because we're going to just test on the Israelis with our national healthcare system, their national health ID, and we'll find out what works and what doesn't. So there's this hiding it in plain view, rubbing our noses in it. Now the Democrats are, illegals are going to vote, and we're going to give them free healthcare and free housing and free education. So they're really just coming out of the open. Here's Bill Gates bragging.
Yeah. Is there something to worry about with medicines? That is, might some of them have side effects? Do we need safety testing? I mean, and we're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in the little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein.
He's literally getting off on it right there.
Yep. Well, this is what I said before. This is actually the behavior of not just a bad actor. This is the behavior of a serial killer. He doesn't have any problem with the fact that in the name of experimentation and expediency, he's killed numerous children in Indian clinical trials of all kinds of drugs. He doesn't have any problem with the idea of injecting things into children. And by the way, anybody who injected mRNA into a vein would in fact be a serial killer, because that's actually not how you do an IM injection. So even the way he says it, it's actually a constructive admission to a crime. I mean, this guy has zero capability to actually get out of his own way, because he has been put into the position of being the implementer-in-chief of the plan, which actually is not a plan that Bill Gates created. It's a plan that Bill Gates is part of the implementation side of its execution. That's why I try to remind people that we need to have an open conversation going into the next 60 days about who is funding campaigns, and let's have disclosures on how many dollars did they make from Moderna investments? How many dollars did they make from Pfizer investments? These are very simple questions. I asked the question of Vivek Ramaswamy back when he was running for the nomination. I asked the question, does anybody care about his investment in the lipid nanoparticle that was actually used to carry the mRNA into billions of people's arms? Now, I was told that that was unpatriotic and it was inappropriate. But the fact of the matter is, if you go back and look at the Acuitas Arbutus pharmaceutical, University of British Columbia sourced lipid nanoparticle, which was the carrier for all of the mRNA shots, that's how Vivek got his money. And people don't like when I say that. They go, yeah, but he got his money other places, and it's not just from that. May be true, but here's the problem. The problem is, if you're using pandemic-derived resources to fund a campaign, is there any reasonable expectation that we're going to have truth and accountability on the part of the candidates being supported by?
I understand your concern.
So, as I said in a recent conversation, the place you start is yourself. You have to start with making sure that you actually examine yourself. You make sure that you're examining the way you're living. I saw in the break that, you had Peter McCullough on there. I think his recommendations about making sure that you take care of your own health so that you're not susceptible to whatever is done in the environment is actually a great thing. I've encouraged that. I've encouraged people to look into John Hewlett's Cardio Miracle for the exact same reason, because I actually think that the more we can do to make ourselves healthy, the better we are when it comes to environmental exposures to all manners of things, not just these biological weapons. But I think what we have to do is, I think we have to see in the next 60 days, we have to see the public double down on making the issues actually something that have to be part of the conversation during the campaign. We are not having conversations about gain-of-function research, and we must. We are not having conversations about the judiciary suspending access to courts in the name of public health emergencies. We're not having those conversations. And we have to have public statements of our public officials where they are actually committing to either caring about upholding and defending the Constitution or admitting to the fact that they are going to allow public health terrorism to suspend the Constitution. This is a simple conversation. It's a simple topic. But unfortunately, we are not seeing the candidates pressed on it. Nobody is pressing either side on these issues. And the reason is because, as I came back before, the funding sources that enrich themselves on the back of knowing, and by the way, it goes back to the 2015 Peter Daszak quote, investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. The problem that we have is that we have an economic incentive that says, no matter who occupies the White House, none of that's going to matter, because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is the corporate interests and the financial interests who realize that for the public to be cowed into submission, we use public health fear and we use domestic and international terrorism with biological weapons to actually get them to cower.
And let me back you up on that. I remember on C-SPAN in 2018 and 19, there were a series, we played the clips before, of all the different health officials, government agency people, Fauci on C-SPAN saying, we're about to blow up the old system. We're about to bring in all these new therapies, mRNA. We're probably going to use something like bird flu out of China to do it. And they were just openly saying this is going to be the future, and investors should get involved. Kind of like the former head of Google, Eric Schmidt, was at Stanford just a few weeks ago and openly said, here's the companies to invest in. This is the future. But it's all insider trading. It's out in the open. So let me bring you to Zuckerberg. Why do you think, after all these federal officials lied and said they weren't involved in censoring the election or COVID or any of this, why do you think he put that letter out saying he was pressured? Is it because he doesn't want to lie to Congress? Is he knows whistleblowers are about to come out? I mean, we know Zuckerberg's a pretty soulless character. Why do you think he did that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it was a very fascinating thing to see. And as you can imagine, when I saw it, I actually had exactly the same thought you had, which is, it's a little too late. The fact of the matter is you did what you did. It would be meaningful if you reinstated the content that he took down from you, from me, and from people like us. But that is not what he did. He actually pretended to actually have this now act of contrition that maybe he was pressured into something. But I think what we have is a situation where it is in the financial interest of Facebook to now recognize that they have now been seen as a covert propaganda arm rather than a public social media platform. And that's starting to bite them back. If you look at their financials, you see exactly why he did it. He did it because there are an enormous number of people who now realize that Facebook is feeding an AI algorithm, and that's not going over very well. It's actually feeding the propaganda machine of the covert operations that happen in the United States and around the world, and that's not going very well. Remember that the very issues that back in the Arab Spring, and I raised this issue a few weeks ago, the Arab Spring uprising, when everybody was hailing social media as this platform for democratic reform. In fact, the European Union in 2015 actually passed laws that said that no one could actually suppress any information on social media because they said online rights are the same as offline rights. They were the ones that said that. This is absolutely 100% their rules, their laws. And then what do? They threaten Elon Musk when he interviews Donald Trump. They threaten him with deplatforming. They were violating their own rules because when it was overthrowing governments in the Middle East and North Africa, we were all about it. It was a great way to actually foment unrest. It was a great way for getting people to get active. The Arab Spring was nothing but a social media revolution, and giant surprise, the Europeans and the Americans celebrated that. They celebrated the devastation of free and fair elections in Egypt because they wanted to influence the outcome. But the minute the shoe's on the other foot, they violate their own laws. And these are not kind of guidelines and recommendations. These are outright laws. I did a post right after the Elon Musk Trump interview. I did a post about all of the violations of European Union laws that the European Union's digital manager had in fact committed. And guess what? Within 2 days, the European Union actually disavowed her actions. we're having an effect, Alex. I keep coming back to this. We have to stay focused on the real issues. Spending time feeding AI algorithms about fear, about monkeypox, or about H5N2, or any of those things. Feeding that AI beast is serving their objective. Feeding the story about the criminality of the racketeers, the conspirators, and the terrorists who are destroying freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. That's the message we need to actually be promoting. And for the next 60 days, we need everybody listening to the show to actually make sure those messages get out there, because that's what the algorithms will ultimately pick up.
Explain that for people that don't understand, because you're not just one of the smartest people, or the smartest probably, when it comes to explaining all this, and dead on. You also, I see your videos all the time, 50 million, 100 million, even with them trying to suppress it, you reach billions of brains out there. I mean, you definitely, people resonate with what you're saying. So explain to them. That's what I was told about Hollywood people in Google and you name it. They said, don't you know, Alex, you were picked early in a war game like 7-8 years ago with AI that they had obviously back then too, to train an avatar they would fight with, and then also try to change that avatar of who you were. It gets really complex. And people don't understand AI is just a mirror of us. So they try to train it in closed AI, but then when they turn it loose in the public, they say we infected. Well, what's happening is the truth's infecting it. So really, we act like AI is all powerful, but we are the masters of the AI. We realize it.
No question. Listen, if we truth bomb every algorithm and truth bomb it with things like biowarfare, bioweapon, don't call it vaccine, don't call it COVID-19, call it a genetically modified biological weapon, call it gain-of-function research. The terms that we use, and think about when you go into a Google search engine, remember what it does is it suggests the proposed search terms that you probably are interested in. Well, what is that? That's an algorithm that's a frequency-based algorithm that actually triggers your mind to go, oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. The more you talk about Dustin Moskowitz and open philanthropy and their criminal conspiracy with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with World Economic Forum, with the Johns Hopkins University, the more you use the term Dustin Moskowitz and criminal conspiracy, the more you use the term, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation racketeering, the more you actually use that term, the more the algorithm starts picking those things up. I encouraged people back at the very beginning not to use the word vaccine, because vaccine was a trigger word that was going to be flagged in the algorithms. But if you use the term bioweapon, if you use the term gain of function, if you use the term biological toxin, these are things which actually will become more visible. So we need the public to actually step away from the language of the incumbency. I have a whole video on David Martin World. Go onto YouTube, have a look at that. But you've got to look at how we get fooled by using the language of the incumbency. We have to step away from that so that we don't actually fall into their trap. And Alex, I cannot recommend enough. Between now and 60 days from now, we need the terms like gain of function. We need the terms like bioweapon. We need the terms like racketeering to be popularized by the people who are actually sharing things on X and on Instagram and on all forms of social media, Rumble, YouTube. I don't care where it is. Make that term popular, because that will give us the ability to continue to move forward with all of the things we're doing on the legal front. And, we're working very, very hard every day to make sure that we succeed. We will succeed, but we will succeed better with the great support of people like your listeners.
Doc, thank you so much for the time at davidmartin.world, davidmartin.world. They can follow you on X. We'll put that on screen as you leave. Thank you for spending the time with us. And you always have a lot more information. As soon as you can, with more info, please join us again.
Happy to do so, Alex. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
COVID vax causes more heart damage than COVID virus, and brain, blood, immune cancer, reproductive study. I mean, there's so many of these studies. What do you make of that?
This finally settled the question, Alex. The COVID vaccine causes myocarditis in young people, not the infection. It's a government false narrative. It's been propagated through the American College of Cardiology and other agencies that the infection causes myocarditis. It doesn't.
Looking at this, then, we see these headlines constantly. When you follow the article, there's no link, there's no proof. It just says, COVID's a greater risk of heart problems than the shot, and they just lie.
Essentially, it's a giant medical lie perpetrated by the American College of Cardiology, the CDC, the NIH.
The truth is, Jesus' words in Luke 8:17 are being fulfilled as he said, "For nothing is secret that shall not be made manifest, neither anything hid that shall not be known or come abroad. Jesus knew many things would be difficult to bear and even discouraging before his second coming. This is why we are exhorted in Romans chapter 12, verse 21, don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. That advice is exactly how Jesus lived as an example for us today. He always acted redemptively, meaning he responded to humanity in life-giving ways. Even for a great example of this, in Acts 10:38, it says how he went about doing good in healing all that was oppressed of the devil. So we too are not only to expose the darkness around us, but we more as important, or even more importantly, to be the salt and light, offering the promise of healing and eternal life. That very eternal life that Titus 1:2 tells us about, that God promised even before the world began for us. And eternal life is only found in one way, and that is in Jesus Christ himself. Finally, we must realize that our answers will not be found or come from the White House, but actually from the church house. And that is because that is where the Word of God should be heard from. You know, today I want to encourage you, because Jesus said when we see these things, we should lift up our heads, for our redemption draweth nigh. I'm your host, Pastor Chris Morgan.